Yo, Big D back, and we're here talking weather on the Big D podcast. Before I bring in my meteorologist friend, please subscribe, like, and share the Spunky Spectrum Sports YouTube page where you don't know what the weather forecast will be here, but I can assure you it's going to be hot. Also, check out the Big D podcast for all your audio listeners on Spotify and Apple. So, joining us from a little cooler place, my friend Dennis. Dennis, it's wild. It's super wild cold weekend. You know what that means? What's the weather going to be?
Oh, well, this is the time of the year where when you play games all over the country, you're more likely than not to have nasty active weather. But this year, we're really getting lucky because the northern games for the Bills, of course, the most northern of the games, Minnesota indoors, but Buffalo is getting about the nicest weather that Buffalo could ever hope to get this time of the year because they won't have lake effect snow. They won't have a major snowstorm just from, the regular pattern, and it's not going to be bitterly cold. We're probably going to be looking at a game time temperature about 35 degrees. Winds shouldn't be all that strong. So I think Buffalo is going to luck out. Cincinnati, likewise, I don't think there's going to be any major issues for Cincinnati, maybe 40 degrees at game time. Well, I should say 40 degrees for an afternoon high, probably dropping down to about 35, 36 by game time there. But again, no real strong winds. And Florida games are going to be pretty docile as well. So the only game that I'm really concerned about is that 49ers game. And usually this time of the year, it's almost a little too early for the real bad weather, for the typical rainy weather for the Bay Area. But there's been just a series of very strong weather systems moving on shore, and sort of this semi-permanent feature that sits over the Pacific Northwest is kind of dug down a little farther south than usual. And California, as a result, is getting horrible, horrible flooding. And they got another round. I guess this would be round 4 for Northern California is coming this weekend. And looks like the brunt of this storm is going to hit just about at game time. The worst weather getting there probably about 11 o'clock noon local time out there. And the game time set for 1:30, I believe. So I think we're going to be looking at a situation where there's going to be the potential for heavy rain. And with these kind of weather systems, it's really weird on the winds because your winds in the Bay Area can be almost psychotic, like schizophrenic winds, where they're one moment, they're 10, 12 miles an hour. And then, half hour later, little wave of precipitation comes in and the winds are gusting to 30. So it's going to be very unpredictable wind conditions for the game and quite a bit of rain. I would say during the game, they have the potential to get between 1 and 2 inches of rain. So it's going to be pretty nasty. And they've had some pretty heavy rains already around the area. So there might be some serious flooding around even in the streets and the parking lots for the ballpark. So there could be some issues getting folks to the game.
And you mentioned the Seahawks 49ers game. That seems to be the one place where weather will definitely impact this super wild card weekend. I'm hearing same thing you all. It's going to be windy, rain. I think the Bay Area is underneath either like a flood watch or flood
Yep.
warning because of all the weather. But if you were, I mean, obviously fantasy season's over, but if you were like betting the game or potentially playing DFS, would you be more concerned at the wind in Santa Clara or the rain?
The rain, I think, because it's just going to come in, at times it's going to come in sheets. But, the trouble with the Bay Area, and that was an area that I concentrated on as a weather forecaster when I was with United Airlines. the Bay Area is very tough to forecast because of the terrain along the coast and the terrain inland. It affects these weather systems quite a bit. And there are no upper air stations. There's no weather balloons that go up across the ocean. So the weather models don't always do a great job of initiating the conditions. So a lot of times, you're basing just off of satellite data to input into the models. They don't have as exact data as they do for a storm here in the Midwest or on the East Coast. So you end up getting a lot of times the models don't know quite how to handle the storms. And then you get a terrain difference in the area where, it can be absolutely awful in San Jose, at the airport at San Jose, which is a couple of miles away from the ballpark in Santa Clara. And it can be, just a lighter rain in Santa Clara. The radar is going to be looking pretty weird on Saturday for that game. It's going to be very hard to figure out with any exact, guess this far out. But the one thing I can say is I'm in a playoff league where you pick your guys and then you get more points for them if they continue to play in advanced games. And before the weather, I was going to load up on every San Francisco 49er because I really have a feeling they're going to go deep in the playoffs. I like their defense, but with the way this rain is, I'm going to get off of Brock Purdy. I'm going to go with Josh Allen instead. And I'm going to probably still take McCaffrey at running back. And I'm kind of debating what to do at tight end. I'll probably take Kelsey and take a 0 this week because I really like the Chiefs' chances of getting all the way to the Super Bowl. But yeah, I would be worried about this because it's not just the kicking game. It's just the fact that it's going to be probably a low-scoring game because of the rain. The only thing I like is the in this league that I'm in, this playoff contest that I'm in, you pick a team defense, and I'm picking San Francisco because I think there's going to be a turnover special for both teams. I would expect to see, 2 or 3 fumbles by each team. You just never know if the other team's going to get it or that you're going to recover your own fumble. But I expect the ball to be on the turf at least 4 or 5 times this weekend.
Yeah, mud ball at its finest.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting because I just don't know enough. We don't have enough track record for that stadium to know how it will take the rain. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. I mean, they've had the field covered through all of these storms the last week too. So I'm sure that they've done a good job of keeping the water off the field, but you got to pull the tarp, a couple hours before game time. You're going to take some heavy rain at times during this game. And, I think it's going to be a mess. But again, I don't have enough of a track record because there really aren't enough data points of heavy rain on the stadium at Santa Clara. So we really don't know how the field is going to react. I mean, if you were going to get rain on a stadium like Soldier Field in Chicago, it would be just a soupy mess and, it would be unplayable by halftime, but don't have enough records of how this is going to hold up with rain out there in Santa Clara.
I mean, the 49ers started the season on a wet Soldier Field. Maybe it's good luck for them.
Well, they did lose that game though, so it was kind of a mess. But Seattle is kind of used to playing in this mess, so maybe this is the great equalizer. I don't know, but this is very much like a Pacific Northwest pattern that they get. So they're going to be used to the heavier rains, I think. But yeah, it's kind of unusual that we go into a weekend with 6 different games, and that's really the only one that's going to be a weather special.
Yeah, but the other Saturday game, the Chargers and my Jags, is going to be unique because I hear it could be one of the coldest home games in Jacksonville Jaguar history.
Yeah, it is going to be a rather nippy day up in northern part of the state. I would say probably a game time temperature around 45, which, for anywhere else in the country but Florida would be considered balmy this time of the year. But they have had some really cold air coming down over the central part of the state and the northern part of the state a couple of times this year. It's not been a typical mild winter for the northern part of Florida, unlike down by you where it's not been as miserable.
Hey, it's going to be in the low 40s for not tonight, but tomorrow night. It's going to be like 41, 42 for a low.
That's the equivalent of about 10 for us up here in Danville. So I'm feeling for you, young man, because you're not you guys aren't built to take 40s.
I'm sure people in Western New York and Cincinnati, Ohio would take 40s right now.
Yeah, it's but I'll tell you, this has been, except for one little stretch around Christmas time, it's been one of those years where it's been kind of a weird one for us. We hit 50 degrees the other day. It was sunny. I was out in a t-shirt playing with the dog in January, so I'm not going to complain about the winter we've had. One interesting stat, well, it's not going to be all that cold for Buffalo by Buffalo standards. It is cold by Miami Dolphins standards. I guess they're they've lost the last 9 games straight where they've played in under 40-degree weather. So this will definitely be testing them, as if it wasn't enough of a test being without Tua.
I've got a question for the Miami Buffalo game. Is Buffalo's home field potentially the most vulnerable to weather? Because we've seen every kind of weather hit Buffalo this year. Snow, rain, sleet, wind, cold. Is Buffalo the most weather unpredictable stadium in the NFL?
I don't think so. And I'll tell you why, because the way the stadium in Pittsburgh is built with the one open end, sort of, where it's like not totally closed off, they have had a lot of trouble with kicking to the open end zone area in the past. So that the wind seems to be kind of fickle in Pittsburgh for that stadium. But you're right, Buffalo tends to have the most wicked weather. I mean, they've had 2 snowstorms this year where it was over, 2-3 feet of snow with the lake effect. So they've already had 2 of those in one winter, although it's been very mild by Buffalo standards lately. And the biggest thing with Buffalo is they can get into some wicked winds and some swirling winds because of the way the lake and the land interact when it heats up. You get a temperature differential between the lake water and the surface temperature of the land when it's kind of mild, and that can lead to some pretty funky wind direction changes out there. But I don't think you're going to have any of that this weekend. You're really looking at probably the lightest winds that we'll see for a Buffalo home game in the month of January. January tends to be a very windy month in northern New York with a predominant west-northwest wind. But this year, this pattern for this weekend is not living up to the usual standard. So I'm not expecting a wind speed over 10 miles an hour for the game in Buffalo, which is very unusual for them indeed.
I'm sure kickers will like that because you think Buffalo, and I'm like, I'm go for it on 4th now. I can actually kick the ball.
Yeah, it's anytime you're playing in Buffalo this time of the year and it's not like 10 degrees and the ball feels like a brick when you hit it with your foot, or it's so windy you think it's like Lucy pulling the ball away from Charlie Brown at the last minute, or they don't get all of it. But no, it actually should be a very good kicking game for Buffalo. I'm not thinking a very good kicking game for Miami because I don't think their offense is going to do much. They just it's going to be tough to go with what basically, I mean, they're not going to have either of their top two quarterbacks from the way it's looking right now, unless Bridgewater makes a remarkable recovery here. So I think Buffalo will kind of beat up on the poor kid. I'm hoping they give him a game because I want to see a good bunch of playoff games. And as a Chiefs fan, I wouldn't mind seeing the Buffalo Bills get knocked out of the playoffs. But
Yeah,
they're the
because then
team
you
that I
can
fear the
actually
most.
host an AFC championship.
Yeah, for the fifth straight year, wouldn't that be something? I don't have a problem. I know there were some Chiefs fans that I saw on Twitter that were having a fit about what they're doing with the home field advantage. I will say this, Cincinnati got off to a really good start on that Monday night game, and they were driving for another score there when the tragedy happened. And, if Cincinnati wins that game and everything else happens the same way as it did in the final week of the season, Kansas City doesn't have to worry about home field advantage. They would have it. And I think Cincinnati's a team that matches up great against Buffalo, or at least they did before they lost two of their linemen. Cincinnati being down two offensive linemen kind of reminds me of my Chiefs in the Super Bowl against Tampa a few years ago, where we were all beat up. You got to give Burrow some kind of protection, and you got to have some kind of a running game. Otherwise, that Ravens defense could be tough and could pull off the upset. And of course, as a Chiefs fan, I don't mind seeing Cincinnati beaten as well, because Chiefs haven't done so well against Joe Burrow the last three times.
Yeah. So obviously, there is one game with a dome, the Giants and Vikings. So I think the total for that is what, 47 and a half. But how much of a difference does the Giant Viking game taking place in a dome make it in terms of an over-under compared to it being outdoors?
Well, it would be pretty cold outdoors. Would be in the 20s, which by Minnesota standards isn't too bad. But yeah, it definitely changes the way the game is played, because outdoors you'd probably be playing on a natural turf field, unless that's what Minnesota had many years ago out at old Metropolitan Stadium back in the Bud Grant days. And when it got cold like that, that field got frozen and it was tough to get your footing. And we saw recently that this Minnesota team doesn't do well on natural turf sometimes, as they showed against Green Bay a few weeks ago. So yeah, I think you're looking at a difference, typical Minnesota weather outdoors versus indoors here this weekend. You're probably looking at a difference of 8 to 10 points, maybe.
And
And I really
I'm guessing
think that this.
go ahead.
No, I'm really thinking this is going to be a high scoring game. I think the over under might be quite low on this one. I know typically in the playoffs, the game slows down, teams run more. They kind of work the clock a little bit more. It's a little more, it's not as up and down, but both of these teams, I think, have the capability of putting some points on the board. And so I'm kind of looking at this as being a high scoring game.
I agree with you. I mean, we saw what happened a couple of weeks ago when these teams played. It wasn't. I mean, Darren Jones put up over 300 yards, and we know what the Vikings can do. Hopefully, Justin Jefferson remembers how to catch the ball, because the Packers sure eliminated that threat a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, I think there's going to be no shortage of balls going Jefferson's way, Thielen's way. KJ Osborne has really been coming on here
DJ Hawkins.
lately. Yeah. Hawkinson, I think he's a guy that I'm looking at. I'm already starting to work on my ratings for next year. And Hawkinson's a guy that I'm really thinking is going to be possibly just below that elite level. And of course, only one elite tight end this year.
Let me guess. That Kelsey guy.
Yeah, he was the only elite tight end. I do think he's going to start showing some signs of age here in the next couple of years, but until then, I think he's still the elite guy. But there's that second group of Kittle, Waller, that I think might be added in with Hawkinson and, Andrews, of course, if Lamar is back with Baltimore would be in that group too. So I think that second group might add one more player next year. Not sure what's going to happen with the Raiders. Not even sure if Waller's going to be with the Raiders next year. It'll be interesting to see what they do. But I've been really impressed with Hawkinson since he came over from Detroit. He has been a solid tight end play in fantasy football. And he's a guy that if I thought the Vikings were going to go farther, I think they got a chance of getting beat against the Giants. I mean, the Giants really had them beat a few weeks ago.
I think the Giants win this weekend. I mean, yeah, Minnesota's may have a great offense on paper, but the Vikings go into the playoffs with a negative point differential. They won literally every close game this year. New York didn't play anybody last week. So you tell me Daniel Jones and Saquon Barkley are fresh, and I really like Brian Daboll as a head coach. Not that I hate Kevin O'Connell, but I think the Giants are more capable of winning this game.
Daboll has really impressed me. He's coach of the year in my book, because if you look at what the Giants have on paper, and the fact that your top two wide receivers right now are Slayton and a guy by the name of Isaiah Hodgins that nobody really heard of before this year, and he's turned them into solid wide receivers. You know how far Kenny Golladay has fallen in his career when he was the only guy playing last week. It was like, go ahead, Kenny, we don't need you. You'll get hurt. But everybody else was being rested except for Kenny Golladay, and he did find his way into the end zone. But no, I've really been impressed with the way the Giants have played this year. Danny Dimes, I'm not sold on as a franchise type quarterback, but Dable got a lot out of him this year. And, Barkley is Barkley. He is still one of the top running backs in the league, but he wore down a little bit at the end. So I think having the week off is really a good thing for him. And, I haven't looked at the injury report yet for the Giants game. I don't know if Bellinger is going to be back to play, but he's another guy at tight end who's impressed me in the red zone.
Okay, you mentioned turf and grass. The last game I want to talk about is the Dallas-Tampa Bay game, and it's mostly about the Cowboys because I've noticed an odd trend with the Cowboys this year. Do you know what Dallas's record is on turf?
I don't. Oh, on turf, it's really good. And I know their defense performance has been incredible. Their number of sacks is so much better than when they play on a real grass.
How about this? The Cowboys' record this year is 11-1 on turf. The defense has recorded 25 takeaways and 42 sacks. But on grass, Dallas is 1-4 with 8 takeaways and 12 sacks. And that one win came against the Titans when they didn't play anybody.
Yeah. That has been an incredible difference, but it makes sense because Dallas's defense is built for speed. And, at home on the turf or even on the road on the turf, but especially at home on the turf, they have been fast. They've been tough. Even the games where the offense hasn't done all that well at home and they've struggled, you still had great defensive effort. There is so much speed on that defense.
And by the way, who was the only team to beat the Cowboys on turf this year?
Ooh, that's a good question.
I'll give you a hint. Tampa Bay,
It was Tampa. Okay.
week 1, I think the score was
That's right.
19
That's
to
right.
3.
I was trying to think. I knew Tampa beat them week 1. I was trying to think whether that was home or away.
It
But
wasn't.
yeah, Tampa really is well positioned in this game. It'll be interesting to see how they can do it.
All right, Dennis. Before we sign off, I do want to ask you, what was your? There've been so many bad weather games. We could spend an hour. We could spend a day and a half talking about bad weather games. Do you have one bad weather postseason game that sticks in your brain?
Yes, I do. I remember. I'm not a Bears fan, but I was working in the weather office for a private weather company, and one of our clients was the city of Chicago, the Park District, on the famous Fog Bowl against Philadelphia. And we were watching the game that afternoon while we were on the phone trying to tell folks how bad this fog was. And we gave them the advance that it was coming in, but I remember watching that game and you couldn't even see the players out in the middle of the field at times. It was so funny. And then when they'd show the field and you could see the players, you couldn't see the sidelines. It was the most incredible game that I've ever seen. The famous Fog Bowl against Philadelphia years ago in Chicago.
And it's weird because depending on location, like it was nowhere else in Chicago. Like the airport was fine, Wrigley Field was fine.
Oh yeah.
Literally, that state field by the lake was foggy.
Yep, it was incredible because what we were watching in the weather office that day is all of a sudden Meigs Field, which it used to be an airport right on the lakefront there. They kind of built it out on some landfill. All of a sudden the visibility went 0-0. And we're like, what is going on here? And we're looking at the visible satellite and you can see this stuff and it's just oozing down from Meigs down to Soldier Field, and it took the whole stadium out. I mean, it was the weirdest looking satellite picture, but I don't think the fog went farther than about 2.5 miles inland that day. As far as the real dense stuff, it was just an advection fog coming in off the lake, and it was so dense, and it just wouldn't go away all game.
That's the only thing that would sue Buddy Ryan and Buddy Ryan and Mike Ditka in '88.
I'd like to see if they can simulate that for Madden football games. That would be fun to play.
Well, obviously, we all remember the Ice Bowl between the
Yes.
Cowboys and Packers, but to me, how about the Freezer Bowl between the San Diego Chargers and Cincinnati Bengals? And that's after San Diego played the epic Miami, where it was like 84 degrees with 80% humidity. And we all remember Kellen Winslow cramping, and yet blocking the field goal at the end of the regulation. But then literally the Chargers went from the beach to Antarctica.
That was a brutal one. I also remember the Elway Drive game against Cleveland. That was bitterly cold. That was a crazy one. And of course, yep, in New England, you have the famous, snowplow game where they came out and cleared off the kickers area there for them and changed a rule. So there's been some funny ones in the playoffs indeed.
I mean, and the strange thing about the Freezer Bowl game is the Cincinnati Bengal offensive linemen all wore short sleeves because they didn't want the other team crapping the other linemen crapping their jerseys.
Hey, those are tough guys. Those big uglies up front, man, they're tough.
Hopefully we don't have to deal with negative 59 wind chill at any point during the playoffs.
Now, next week, if Buffalo wins and they're hosting again, next week it could be a very active weather pattern by the end of the week. So they might not have as much of a docile game as they had this week coming up.
I think it depends on, well, yeah, it depends on when it is. If it's Saturday, it might be one
Yes.
forecast. If it's Sunday, that's another one.
Yep. That's why I say it's going to be an active weather pattern towards the end of next week in Buffalo. And it's just a matter, it's too far out to give a really good timing. But whenever it's an active weather pattern, I look at it and go, this one's going to be a little tougher of a call versus this week where it's a pretty easy call.
All right, Dennis. Thanks for talking weather with me. Hopefully, things go well, and maybe we'll see your Chiefs in another Super Bowl. I mean, you started the year in Glendale. Maybe you'll end the year there, right?
That would be a lot of fun. And for the record, I'm really glad that the game that would be for the AFC Championship, if it is the Bills versus the Chiefs, will be in a very nice indoor stadium for both quarterbacks. So being played down in Atlanta is the word. So that'll be okay by me as a Chiefs fan.
Better bring the air conditioning because I hear the humidity there is unlike any stadium, even more so than even for like indoor stadium.